So the regularly available salt is iodized.
Okay, so I would recommend that you take like half and half, depending upon how much salt you take. So, for example, the iodine, I go by the RDA, the recommended daily allowance maximum, because iodine is a pretty tricky substance that can harm you. Like if you take too much, it can get you into hypothyroidism, thinking that you're not having enough. So it can backfire on you. So I go with 150 microgram maximum a day. And so in the US, it's very easy because we can get salt without iodine and salt with. And so I calculated how much salt, for example, for me, I take with iodine, and then how much I should take without iodine. So this way I'm sort of kind of half and half. Or if it's too complicated, maybe if you can get the salt without iodine for permanent use and just use that, and then get iodine as a supplement, you can get, I would recommend kelp, the like ground kelp coming in capsules as a supplement, is a very good form of iodine. I'm not fond of, the liquid because it's inaccurate and also highly synthetic, which I'm not fond of whatsoever. So we want to stay as natural as much as possible and stay within the 150 microgram as much as you can. I mean, it's not going to harm you if you one day 180, but don't be like 2000.
Right, got it. Thank you so much. Also, one other question was, for me personally, strong lights are a very strong trigger for migraine. Does salt help with that as well?
Right. So the reason why you're sensitive to the strong light is because you are already out of electrolyte balance. So that's actually a prodrome. So we haven't talked about prodrome. Prodrome are hints that you're out of electrolyte balance. So if you feel that you're sensitive to light suddenly and you weren't 5 minutes ago, if you feel that you're talking to a friend and suddenly the friend's voice becomes louder than what it was before, or similar, then just notice. You have to notice that this change is taking place, and that's a prodrome, and immediately take salt. And so there's a trick about taking salt. That's another thing that I recommend you join my group, because we help you learn how to take the salt properly. Because, for example, if your body released a lot of glucose in glycogen because you had stress, or if you ate carbohydrates and you take salt with water, it's going to cause more problem. You just need salt then without water, because you have a lot of water in your body, because carbohydrates release a lot of water. Glucose entering the cell removes a lot of water from the cell. So then you end up with edema, and that on its own is a really bad one. So in this case, you want to take just salt and just get it done with a tiny bit of a sip of water. We call this a salt shot. So you basically just take a 1/8 teaspoon of salt on its own. But if you haven't had any carbohydrates for a number of hours, and you were not anxious or anything, but suddenly you get change of voice or change of light sensitivity, then you can take salt with water. So there are some caveats here.
Understood. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
So, which is the best way for our viewers to contact you?
Well, the best way is actually in the group. So those people who can, they should join my group, which would be at Facebook/groups/migraine sufferers. It's one word, but they can just look for my name, and I'm glad to direct them to the group, because in the group, everything is free. Everything is right there. We do have a requirement to read the book. They don't have to buy the book. It's available in libraries, and it's available there's an Amazon where you can just rent it for like a few hours or days and read it, and then put it on the Kindle Unlimited. So there are ways to read it without having to pay for it. So it's not that I want you to buy, but the reading is important because you want to understand the process of what migraine is. And the protocol itself is not in the book, because the book I wrote in 2017, that's when I published it. So at the time, the protocol was still in a much lower designed level than it is today. And so I'm working on a new book, a new edition, which will be the final edition, hopefully, containing all the updates and all the important elements, which will be then standalone, so they don't have to join the group. But for now, joining the group is really extremely helpful and essential. And I've got 3 administrators who have been with me from the beginning, they're also volunteering the time, and they all understand migraine very good. They're all migraineurs themselves. And they provide all the help that we need 24/7. They have 24/7 help.
All right. I have one question from my end also. So, one of the problems with processed food is this uh, sodium potassium ratio, which has been like totally skewed in direction of sodium. So,
Right.
I think I have somebody asked me a question like, what are good sources of potassium as from your perspective for this?
Okay, very good question. And also I will tell you how to check the sodium content. So if you go to the USDA database, now it might not be equivalent to what they have in India, and I don't know, but you can look on the label on the back how much sodium and potassium is in the food, and you can control for that. Because if it lacks potassium, you pair it with the food that has high potassium to balance it out, okay? And so in the US, of course, we eat a lot of meat, and meat are, if it's fresh meat and it's not processed meat, so I'm not talking about salami and these kind of things, they're very high in potassium. Fish is very high in potassium. In the plant world, it's a little bit more difficult because most of the plants that you would be eating are also high in carbohydrates. And so those plants that aren't high in carbohydrate, that are also rich in potassium, those would be like almonds, the Swiss chard, the green leafy vegetables, the cruciferous vegetables like the cauliflower and the broccoli. But surprisingly, they're not avocados. The avocado is a fruit. So as a fruit, it's fantastic. But like as a vegetables, unless you go into the starchy potatoes and all, they're not really high in potassium. So I found, vegetables a little bit odd when it comes to migraine. And so we have many Indian members in the group, and we have difficult time if they're not eating eggs, for example, because then, if it just have milk, it's sufficient for the protein and all content, but you will be lacking serious amount of potassium, serious amount of sodium, nutrients. It's very difficult. Like I had one migrainer in my group, a male from India who doesn't eat eggs. So he ended up drinking 1 gallon of milk every single day. And that was his main course of food. And he ate a lot of cheese. He barely ate anything else. And so I don't think that is nutritionally complete. So even if you match the sodium and potassium very carefully, you may still have problem when it comes to matching the other nutrients. And so at least the eating of milk, of course, obviously, and the dairy and eggs would help you also, because an egg is a whole life, right? And so it will have equal amount of sodium and potassium, just like humans. If we took a human apart and we looked at all the minerals and we put the minerals on a scale, the sodium and potassium, they would be in different amounts because the size of each molecule is different, but the total weight is equal. And so it's very easy to make that in an egg, which is a whole life that has equal sodium and potassium. It's very difficult in a subset of foods like plants, which do not have that need for the same balance, but all animals do. And so I find it very difficult to help vegetarians as a result. It's still much easier than vegans. Vegans, I can't help at all. Vegetarians, I can, but I have a problem with the protein, because in order for you to get protein, unless you eat a lot of soy, what other choices do you have in plants? You don't really have, do you?
We have cottage cheese,
So the
dairy
dairy.
from
So
the
those
dairy.
are animal products, right? So you've got the animal products. And so you have to have some form of animal products to get all your nutrients, including the sodium and potassium.
In India, dairy is considered vegetarian, so it's not a
Right.
problem.
Right. Vegetarian is great because we can work with a vegetarian. But if it's very restricted, even within vegetarian, like eggs, for example, then that's starting to be much more difficult. It's not impossible, but difficult. And vegan is absolutely impossible.
And
Right.
finally, is there any blood work we should be looking out for, like the electrolytes and all that?
Okay, so, and this is a very good question. It's much more complicated than it seems, because like you said at the very beginning, that somebody had a blood sodium of 135, which was a hyponatremic or close to it, depending on the lab. That really represents just kidney health. So that really isn't representative of whether the person has enough sodium in the brain or not. It's also associated with the level of glucose in the body because, like I noted earlier, sodium is used to take the glucose out. So the more carbohydrate the person eats, the less the sodium will be in their blood because it's going to be used to take the glucose to the cell. And then the cell will kick the sodium out and kick the water out, but that's not going back into the blood. It goes to edema. And so we are talking about edema space. So this is why, for example, one treatment for somebody with edema to pull the water back is to take salt without water, because it's going to attract the water back from the blood. But the salt is going to have a really hard time. It's going to take a long time to get out of the place where it's at because it's not inside the blood. It's maybe stuck in some very tiny capillary somewhere, and it's not going to be moving the way that it should. And so when you're looking at a blood test, you can't really judge based on the sodium and potassium, the level of sodium and potassium or the electrolyte. But what you can judge whether the kidneys are healthy. So my personal finding using the stent to migraine protocol for over 10 years is that people who join us with bad kidneys, we have several people with one kidney or kidney transplant or all kinds of issues, and everybody's kidneys function improves tremendously. I can give you my own personal kidney function story. About 8 years ago, I was given a medication that I had to take for my liver. I had an illness that had to be treated, and my kidney was nearly shot. My GFR, which is a glomerular filtration rate, so it's a rate with which the kidneys remove toxins from the blood, went below 40, which was very bad. The ideal is over 90. So it went below 40. At 35, you're being put on dialysis. So it was, or medication at least, getting there. So it's really bad. And so they thought that was it. I was shot for the rest of my life. This is going to be my kidney, because kidney recovering is unknown, right? Because everybody's eating a high carbohydrate diet. But I was not on a high carbohydrate diet. And today my kidney GFR is 90. Okay, so it recovered. So every time I go for any kind of a test and they check my blood, my doctor always says, wow, I can't believe you repaired your kidney. Okay, so you can see that the sodium and the potassium and whatever we test in the blood is independent from migraine. But the things that may help, not for migraine particularly, but for the salt tolerance of the person, would be, for example, looking for inflammatory markers, the C-reactive protein, the estimated, what is it called? The blood cell, how it falls down. I can't think of the word out of a sudden. These kind of things, the HbA1c is a good marker to some degree, not fully, because on the low carb or carnivore or ketogenic diet, the A1C actually will increase because the red blood cell life is going to lengthen. And so it's going to have longer life by about a month to collect damage. So it's going to be a little bit confusing. But so there are some markers, and I look at the red blood, the iron panel, because the iron panel tells me whether the nutrients are absorbing the proper way. Of course, I'm looking at the kidney and the liver panels, and I'm looking at insulin, C-Peptide. These two are important because I find many people with suboptimal levels starting, be it too high or too low, and then sort of recover and come to a balance. But we had in the past found 2 people from Finland, for that matter, whose insulin and C-Peptide are irregular, and they both seem to have severe hyperinsulinemia because they have tons of sugar crashes. But when you look at their level of insulin, it's almost 0. So there's a conflict. And we tested for type 1 diabetes and everything, and nothing is existing. So something with the pancreas, but we can't quite figure out what it is. So there are some very unusual conditions that should be also tested for some. I mean, these 2 people from Finland, nowhere else. But I have only a handful of people from Finland, and 2 of them have this. So that's an eye-opener right away, right? So you kind of have to pay attention to where your patients are coming from and what city even is important. If 2 or 3 have the same exact problem, maybe there's something driving it in the city or in the location where they are. So those are much more important. And the only thing that I found over the years that is migraine specific is that when people get an MRI of the brain, migraineurs tend to have hyperintensities. Those are like the regions in the myelin, which is the insulation over the neuron of the brains, they reflect differently from a normal healthy cell. So migraineurs have myelin damage as a result of the cortical spreading depression. And it's very similar in seizure. So both seizure and migraine will show hyperintensities, but no other brain damage whatsoever, just little spots, maybe 2, 3 of hyperintensities that would represent a myelin damage. And I so far haven't found anything else that would be common for migraine.
I think it was such a lovely, podcast on migraine. And Angela, thank you for all the work you do, spreading so much hope for migraineurs, and all the insights which you shared today on Healthy X Sundays podcast. They're amazing, and we hope that many people understand your protocol and better their lives. So, with that, we want to thank you for your time, your generous time to come and share all the insights. We just had such a great session today. Thank you so much.
Well,
Dave?
thank you for inviting me. It was wonderful meeting you two, and you guys had asked wonderful questions, and I hope I could help the migraineurs who were watching.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Hope to have you again after your new book releases.
Oh yes, thank you. Absolutely.
And stay
Very good.
safe.
Thank you. You too. Thank you. Have a good one.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.